My name is Isabella Reed. I am 33 years old. My family betrayed me by trying to declare me unfit and seize control of my life, shattering the trust I had left after losing my husband. It hit me like a gut punch, leaving me reeling with a mix of rage and deep sorrow that made my chest ache. I was sitting at my kitchen table after a long day teaching second graders sorting through the mail when I came across the official envelope from the court. My hands trembled as I tore it open, and there it was, a petition for guardianship filed by my brother claiming my grief had made me incapable of managing my own affairs, with statements from the rest of my family attached, agreeing it was for my best interest. Their words stared back at me cold and calculated, twisting the knife of my husband's death into something they could use against me. The pain surged through me hot and suffocating, as if every memory of our shared life was being weaponized to strip me of my independence. I stood up slowly, my fists clenched, and grabbed my car keys, deciding right then to drive straight to a lawyer's office before they could take another step. But as I pulled out of the driveway, I realized this fight would unearth secrets that could tear us apart for good. If you've ever felt your own family turn against you in a way that questions your very sanity, how did you handle it? Share in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories, because sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Looking back, it all started to unravel after Thomas passed away. We'd been married for 10 years, building a quiet life here in Portland, Oregon, with its rainy days and cozy coffee shops that always made me feel grounded. He was a carpenter, the kind who could turn a piece of wood into something beautiful, and our home was full of his touches. The bookshelves he built in the living room, the garden bench out back where we'd sit and talk about our dreams. Pancreatic cancer took him fast, just like it does, giving us only a couple of months to say goodbye. I remember holding his hand in the hospital, watching the man I loved fade away, and promising myself I'd hold on to the life we'd created together. The house was in both our names, but his will left it fully to me, along with some savings and his workshop tools, because he knew how much it meant to me as a place of stability after growing up in a family that always seemed chaotic. My family was there in the beginning, or at least they pretended to be. My brother showed up with his wife and their son, helping sort through Thomas's clothes and bringing meals, so I didn't have to think about cooking. My aunt, who lives just outside the city, called every other day with what sounded like genuine concern, asking if I needed anything from the store or someone to mow the lawn. Even my neighbor, who I'd only waved to in passing before, stopped by with a casserole and offered to watch the house if I needed a break. It felt like we were pulling together, like maybe grief could bring out the best in people instead of the worst. But as the weeks turned into months, I started noticing the shifts, little comments that didn't sit right, like cracks in a foundation you ignore until the whole structure tilts. It began subtly, the way these things often do. My brother would drop by on weekends, glancing around the house with that salesman smile of his. He works in commercial real estate, always closing deals and talking about market values. He'd say things like, "This place is a lot for one person to handle now, don't you think?" With the yard and all those stairs, it might be time to consider something smaller, easier. I'd brush it off, telling him I was managing just fine, that the house was my anchor. But then my sister-in-law would chime in during family dinners, her voice soft but pointed, mentioning how worried they all were about me being alone, how it wasn't healthy to cling to the past. Their son, my nephew, was 8 by then, and he'd run around the backyard climbing the tree Thomas had planted years ago, which made me smile even as the conversations grew heavier. One evening, about a year after Thomas was gone, my aunt came over unannounced. Her face set in that judgmental way she has, like she's always assessing everyone's choices. She sat at the kitchen table sipping tea I'd made and started talking about how the family had been discussing my situation. "We're all concerned, dear," she said, her tone laced with that false sweetness that hides a barb. "You've been through so much, and it's clear the grief is affecting you more than you realize. Maybe it's time to let us help with the bigger decisions." I asked what she meant, and she pulled out a folder from her bag, sliding it across the table. A stack of papers about financial planning and something called a voluntary conservatorship. It wasn't forceful yet, but the implication was there. They thought I couldn't handle my own life. I didn't sign anything that night, of course, but it planted a seed of doubt, or maybe wariness. I started paying closer attention to the calls and visits, noticing how my brother would ask casual questions about the house's value, or if I'd updated the will since Thomas died. My sister-in-law sent articles about widows who downsized and found new happiness, always with a note saying, "Just thinking of you." Even my nephew, innocently echoing what he'd heard at home, asked once why I didn't move closer to them so we could be a real family again. It felt like they were circling not out of love, but out of some unspoken agenda, using my loss as leverage to push me toward what they wanted. Then came the day I realized it wasn't just talk. I'd been at school dealing with a classroom full of energetic kids learning about fractions when my phone buzzed with a message from my principal. She wanted to see me after classes. Nothing urgent, but her tone in the text made my stomach knot. When I went to her office, she had a concerned look, the kind educators reserve for tough conversations. "Isabella, we've received a call from your family," she said gently, handing me a note she'd taken. "They expressed worry about your emotional state, suggesting the grief might be impacting your work. They even mentioned you might need time off or support." My mind raced who had called. It turned out to be my aunt, claiming to speak for everyone, painting me as unstable, someone who couldn't be trusted with responsibilities like teaching young children. That call to my job was a low blow, a deliberate jab at the one thing keeping me steady my career. I thanked my principal, assured her I was fine, but inside the anger simmered. When I got home, I confronted my family over a group call, my voice steady despite the hurt. My brother answered first, his charm on full display. "We just want what's best for you," he said, but there was an edge, like he was defending a decision already made. My sister-in-law jumped in, saying they'd all agreed it was time I considered stepping back, maybe moving in with them for a while. My aunt's voice cut through next, sharp and unapologetic. "You're not yourself anymore, and denying it only proves the point. Thomas wouldn't want you struggling alone like this." Their words landed like psychological punches, each one twisting guilt into obligation, making me question if I was the one overreacting. But I wasn't. That conversation revealed the pattern they'd been gaslighting me for months, using my grief to erode my confidence, all while positioning themselves to take control. I ended the call abruptly, my heart pounding, and that's when I knew I had to dig deeper. The next morning, I reached out to my friend who'd known Thomas and me for years and asked if I could stay with him for a few days to clear my head. He agreed without hesitation, sensing something was off. While packing, I started going through old documents, the ones Thomas and I had organized together, and found discrepancies in some family-shared accounts we'd rarely used since his death. What I uncovered shook me further. There were small transfers, nothing huge, but consistent money moved from a joint savings to my brother's business account labeled as loans I never approved. When I checked the dates, they aligned with the times my family had been pushing hardest about my instability. It was as if they were building a case, creating a paper trail to show I wasn't managing finances well. My neighbor stopped by that afternoon, noticing my car packed, and shared something that added to the puzzle. She'd seen my aunt lingering around the house a few times when I was at work, even peeking in windows. "I thought it was family checking on you," she said, but her tone suggested it felt off to her too. I drove to my friend's place that evening, the rain pattering on the windshield like a drumbeat of impending storm. As I unpacked, I called a lawyer I'd found online, someone specializing in family disputes and estate issues. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, the petition, the job interference, the suspicious transfers. "This sounds like a coordinated effort," she said matter-of-factly. "We'll need to act carefully, but we can counter this." We set up a meeting for the next day, and as I hung up, a mini cliffhanger hung in the air. What else had they done that I hadn't discovered yet? Little did I know the guardianship filing was just the tip, and my aunt's involvement ran deeper than I imagined, with a twist that would force me to question everything about our family ties. The meeting with my lawyer the next day opened my eyes to just how calculated their moves had been, and as I sat in her office overlooking the bustling streets of Portland. She laid out the documents I'd brought, her expression turning serious as she pointed out the patterns of manipulation that could turn into a full-blown legal battle. We spent hours going over strategies, deciding to start with a formal cease and desist letter to halt any further interference. But she warned me that families like mine often escalated when cornered, and her words hung over me like a shadow as I left wondering what fresh hell they'd unleash next. Back at my friend's house that night, I couldn't shake the unease, so I dove deeper into the financial records on my laptop, tracing those unauthorized transfers that seemed too deliberate to be mistakes. That's when I found emails buried in an old shared account, messages between my brother and my aunt discussing how to protect the family assets from my supposed instability, with phrases like, "She's not in her right mind since Thomas," and "we need to act before she squanders it all." My blood ran cold reading them, each line a jab at my grief, turning it into an excuse for their greed. But what stung worse was seeing my sister-in-law's name CC'd on one, her reply simply, "Agreed, let's move forward." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short bursts, and called my neighbor right then, asking if she'd noticed anything else unusual around the house lately. She hesitated before admitting she'd seen my aunt meeting with a stranger in a suit on my porch 2 days ago, exchanging papers that looked official and promised to keep an eye out, her voice laced with concern that mirrored my growing paranoia. The pressure ramped up almost immediately after that, as if they sensed I was on to them. My brother started calling daily, his tone shifting from charm to thinly veiled threats, saying things like, "We're doing this because we care, but if you fight it, you'll regret making this a public mess." I'd hang up, but the messages kept coming, texts from my aunt dripping with sarcasm like, "Thomas would be disappointed in how stubborn you're being, isolating yourself from the people who love you." Even my sister-in-law got in on it, dropping by my friend's place uninvited one afternoon with my nephew in tow, using him as a shield while she pleaded, "Benjamin misses his aunt. Don't let your pain tear the family apart." It was a low blow watching my nephew play with toys on the floor, oblivious to the tension, as she whispered that signing over some control would make everything easier, her words cutting like a knife disguised as kindness. I told her to leave, my voice firm but shaking inside, knowing they were wearing me down with this emotional siege, making every day feel like a countdown to some breaking point. School became my refuge, but even there, the ripples spread. One morning, as I was prepping for a lesson on storytelling, my principal pulled me aside again, this time with a printed email from an anonymous sender. Turns out it was traced back to a library computer near my aunt's house, claiming I'd been erratic in class with concerns from parents that were fabricated. The sarcasm in the message was unmistakable, mocking my fragile state, and suggesting I needed evaluation before handling children. My principal dismissed it as nonsense, but the damage was done. Whispers started among the staff, and I felt eyes on me during lunch, the isolation creeping in like fog over the Willamette River. I confronted my family that evening in a heated video call demanding they stop the sabotage, but my brother just smirked, saying, "Prove it's us and maybe we'll talk," while my aunt added a cutting jab, "You're paranoid, dear. Grief does that to people." Their denial fueled my resolve, but it also left me questioning if I could win without losing pieces of myself in the process. Seeking some normalcy, I invited my friend over for dinner a few nights later, needing someone outside the chaos to ground me. We cooked pasta in his small kitchen, laughing about old memories with Thomas. But midway through, my phone lit up with a notification from the bank, a hold placed on my account due to suspicious activity, reported by a joint holder I didn't even remember adding years ago, back when family ties felt unbreakable. It was my brothers doing, no doubt, a private coercion tactic to starve me out, forcing me to beg for access or concede to their guardianship push. Panic set in as I tried to log in, the screen flashing error messages, and my friend stepped in, offering to lend me cash until we sorted it, his support, a rare bright spot amid the mounting dread. But as we talked, He revealed a twist he'd uncovered through a mutual acquaintance my aunt had been quietly consulting with a real estate appraiser about my house, appraising it behind my back as if it were already theirs to claim. That revelation hit hard, escalating the private pressure into something that felt irreversible, like they'd crossed a line from manipulation to outright theft. I spent the next day at the bank providing proof to lift the hold, but the manager's sympathetic look only amplified my humiliation, as if my family's actions had branded me unreliable in the eyes of strangers. By evening, I was back with my lawyer updating her on the new developments, and she advised gathering more evidence before countering, suggesting I install discrete cameras at home to catch any further intrusions. We drafted a stronger response, including demands for them to cease all contact until the matter was resolved. But she cautioned that this could fracture the family beyond repair, a high-stakes gamble, where winning might mean losing them forever. As I drove home, rain slicking the roads, I spotted my sister-in-law's car parked near my street and my pulse quickened. What was she planning now? The confrontation came sooner than expected, pulling me into a web of lies that threatened to unravel everything. My nephew's birthday was that weekend, and despite the tension, I showed up at their house on the outskirts of Portland, determined not to let them cut me out entirely from his life. The party was in full swing, kids running around the backyard with balloons and cake, but the air thickened when I walked in. My brother pulled me aside almost immediately, his face a mask of false concern, whispering, "Sign the papers and this all stops. We're family after all." Before I could respond, my aunt joined us, her voice dripping with venom. "Or keep fighting and see how quickly you lose what's left, starting with Benjamin's affection." It was a psychological gut punch using my love for my nephew as leverage, and I fired back with a sharp retort. "You mean the affection you're poisoning with your lies?" The argument spilled out into the open, voices rising as my sister-in-law tried to intervene, but her half-hearted, "Let's not do this here," only highlighted her complicity. Guests started whispering, the party grinding to a halt, and in that moment of public exposure, my neighbor texted me. She'd checked the cameras I'd just installed and caught footage of my aunt entering my house earlier that day with a key. She must have copied, rummaging through drawers. The evidence was damning a hidden truth that flipped the power dynamic, but sharing it now would explode the gathering into chaos. I stepped back, heart racing, deciding to hold on to it for the lawyer. But as I left the party early, my brother's parting shot echoed, "You'll regret walking away." Little did he know that footage held a secret that could turn their coercion into criminal charges, but using it might cost me the last threads of family connection forever. I held onto that footage like a lifeline, but unleashing it felt like pulling the pin on a grenade that could destroy what little was left of our bonds. The next morning, I forwarded the video to my lawyer, who reviewed it quickly and called back with a plan we'd file for a restraining order against my aunt for the unauthorized entry and use it as leverage to dismantle the guardianship petition entirely. "This shows intent," she said, her voice steady over the phone. "But be prepared, they'll fight dirty when they realize you've got proof." I nodded to myself, staring out the window at the misty Portland skyline, knowing this would force a reckoning, one where secrets spilled and alliances shattered, but hesitation gnawed at me. What if exposing them meant losing my nephew forever? The legal wheels turned faster than I expected, starting with a demand letter sent to my family that afternoon, outlining the evidence of trespassing, financial tampering, and harassment, demanding they withdraw the petition or face charges. My brother's response came via email, hours later, a mix of denial and accusation. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting family concern into something criminal. Drop this, or you'll be the one tearing us apart." It was a classic deflection laced with that salesman's slickness, but my aunt's follow-up call was pure venom, her words slicing through the line. "You ungrateful girl, after all we've done, Thomas must be rolling in his grave seeing you attack your own blood." I hung up without a word, but the jab landed, stirring up guilt that made my hands shake as I blocked her number, wondering if this path would leave me truly alone. My sister-in-law reached out separately that evening, her text pleading for a private meeting at a neutral coffee shop downtown away from the others. I agreed, hoping for some crack in their united front, but as we sat across from each other with steaming mugs between us, her eyes avoided mine at first. "I didn't know about the house entry," she admitted quietly, stirring her latte. "But the guardianship. It started as worry, then turned into something else when your brother talked about the house's value." She paused, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard, then leaned in. "Your aunt pushed hardest. She's been struggling financially. Saw your place as a way out." It was a partial confession, a twist that recast my aunt as the mastermind using my brother as the front man. But when I asked if she'd testify, she shook her head. "I can't go against them fully. Benjamin needs his father." Her refusal stung like a fresh betrayal, escalating the isolation as I realized even she prioritized their side over truth. The court hearing for the guardianship came 2 weeks later, a sterile room in the county courthouse where tensions boiled under fluorescent lights. My lawyer presented the evidence methodically, the emails the bank holds, the camera footage of my aunt slipping into my home like a thief, even witness statements from my neighbor who'd seen suspicious activity multiple times. My family sat on the other side, my brother fidgeting in his suit, my aunt glaring daggers, my sister-in-law keeping her head down. When the judge questioned them, my brother stammered excuses about helping, but my aunt cracked under pressure, admitting to the entry with a sarcastic quip, "I was just checking on family property, someone had to." It was the slip that sealed it. The judge denied the petition outright, citing clear abuse of process, and issued a no-contact order against my aunt for 6 months, with warnings of fines if the harassment continued. Victory tasted bittersweet in the hallway aftermath, as my lawyer shook my hand and said we'd won. But watching my family huddle together, whispering furiously, I felt the irreversible loss settle in. My brother approached briefly, his face twisted in defeat. "Happy now you've turned us into enemies." I didn't respond, just walked away. But the words echoed a psychological jab that highlighted the chasm now between us. Back home that night, I changed the locks myself, a symbolic act of reclaiming my space, but the quiet echoed louder than before, reminders of Thomas everywhere, without the buffer of family visits. My neighbor stopped by with wine to celebrate, sharing how she documented more odd sightings, her support, a new twist in forming alliances outside blood ties, but it couldn't fill the void. The fallout rippled through the months that followed a slow collapse that tested my boundaries. My sister-in-law filed for divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences, and reached out once to arrange supervised visits with my nephew. But the trust was fractured, our interactions stayed surface level, guarded against further manipulation. I saw Benjamin every other weekend building Legos or reading stories in neutral parks, his innocent questions about why grandma can't come piercing like arrows, forcing me to explain in vague terms that some grown-ups make mistakes. Work stabilized my principle, even apologizing for the earlier doubts, but the whispers lingered a scar on my professional reputation that made me second-guess every parent-teacher conference. Financially, I recovered the transferred funds through a small claim suit, but the legal fees ate into savings, leaving me tighter than before, a constant reminder of the cost. My aunt faced minor charges for trespassing, pleading down to a fine and community service her parting email before the no contact fully kicked in, dripping with resentment. "You'll regret isolating yourself. Family is all you have left." It was her final jab, but I deleted it without reply, focusing instead on therapy sessions, where I unpacked the deep-seated contempt they'd harbored, rooted in seeing me as the fragile one after Thomas's death, an easy target for control. My friend became a closer confidant, helping me host small gatherings that built a chosen family, including my neighbor who introduced me to a support group for those estranged from relatives. Yet the partial win came with shadows, holidays alone, unanswered questions about why they'd turned so vicious, and a lingering ache for the relationships that might have been. In the end, I kept the house, planting new flowers in the garden. Thomas loved marking my nephew's growth on the doorframe in my own handwriting. The maple tree out back, similar to the one we'd dreamed of, grew taller, a symbol of continuity amid the wreckage. But the victory cost me the illusion of family unity, leaving me with self-respect, but a quieter life, boundaries firm, yet lonely. I learned to trust actions over words, to document everything, and to choose myself even when it hurts. If faced with family betrayal that forces you to sacrifice bonds for your sanity, would you walk away knowing the price or hold on hoping for change? Let me know in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else facing the same. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been cathartic sharing this, and I hope it resonates if you've been through something similar.